Family drama, my sister's debt, and my money. I really need to get this off my chest, somewhere. The first thing to say about my father is that he places a very high value on formal education. He had very little of it himself, but believes that it is the best thing that you can do in life. I am one of a set of non-identical twins, with my sister, and she is everything that he could hope for in that she has a bachelor's, a master's, and has just completed medical school. Unfortunately for him, and me, I am not suited to formal education at all. I did enroll for one semester at a state university, but I knew from day one I had made a mistake, and left. He was furious about that at the time, and confidently predicted that I would be a bum, and a loser for the rest of my life. However, I found my niche as an entrepreneur, and after struggling along for a few years at the beginning, I am now doing very well. In the same way that I knew college was not for me, I know that running my own business is. I have started, and sold a number of them over the years and, although not everything I have tried has worked out by any means, the last one I managed to sell for a decent chunk of change, low 8 figures, and have recently moved across country to New York City to find a mentor to help me play in the big leagues. Prior to this incident, I thought that my father had come to terms with me not going to college etc., and making a success of being a businessman instead. He and I have never been on the very best of terms, but I did honestly think we had managed to get to a sort of working relationship. I should add that my sister and I have always been close, and although our lives have taken us in different directions we still speak at least once per month. I always knew that she must have incurred a good amount of student loan debt over the years, but I have never tried to tell her how to live her life, and she has never tried to tell me how to live mine. My sister got engaged last year to a guy she met in law school. I have met him once when they came to New York City for a visit, and he seemed alright to me. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago and I am traveling from New York City to her hometown for a meet the family type dinner with my family, and my future brother-in-law's family. Coincidentally, they come from a nearby town. Up front I will be very honest, and say that I didn't really want to go as it is a long trip for me. I am very busy, and what does it matter if I meet his family or not? But I go, for my sister's sake. Anyways, just before dinner my father pulls me off to one side, tells me that sister and brother-in-law have a combined student loan debt of nearly $500,000, and it would be really nice if I did something for the family for once, and paid it off for them as a wedding gift. What the heck? Frankly, I have been expecting him to ask me to contribute to the cost of the wedding and I had already decided that I would just keep my mouth shut, and pay up so long as it was less than $25,000. But this really shocked me. It was the really matter-of-fact way that he said it. Now, I have the money, and wouldn't really miss it, but that was not the point. It gets worse. As we are sitting down and eating, it transpires that he has told everyone there that I am rich, and I will be paying off the student loan debt. There are toasts, and heartfelt thank yous while I am just sitting there stunned at being railroaded in the most brazen way I have ever seen. Long story short, I said a few things I probably shouldn't have, and end up walking out of the restaurant there and then, and going back to the airport, and catching a red-eye back to New York. While I am in the air, I am stewing on the whole situation, but by the time I land, I have calmed down, and thinking what have I done? However, when I switch my phone back on in the cab back to my apartment it just blows up with voice messages, and texts from my parents, and sister. Later that night, my sister rings me again. And this time I answer it. I explain that it isn't about the money, but the way in which it was just assumed that I would pay up. I know that this sounds really petty now, but I was just so angry at the time. My sister was really surprised as she knew nothing about it before the dinner, and afterwards Dad was going around telling everyone that I had said I was going to pay it, but had now changed my mind. She ended up being really embarrassed in front of her future in-laws, who are now wondering what their son is marrying into, so is now very pissed at our dad. Now here is the present issue. Turns out my sister went back, and confronted our dad about it, and there was a huge argument, and now she is talking about eloping, and not having a big family wedding at all, or only inviting her fiance's family etc. etc. My phone is being flooded with messages from my parents to talk to my sister, and ask her forgiveness so that she will forgive them. The final message from my father before writing this was just him ranting about how I don't deserve the money that I have, and it is because of people like me that college graduates are struggling. Seems that we aren't in such a good place after all. I am not sure what to do. Was I totally out of line? I don't have many friends to talk to about this, and those I do have probably have as equally skewed perception on this as I do. Did I get this totally wrong? Should I just have paid the money? I hate being railroaded, and that is what it felt like, as though my only value there was a source of funds. Having said that, I'd hate to think that my sister's wedding gets ruined because of me. TLDR, I have made some money selling a business, and my father thinks I should pay off sisters and brother-in-law's student loan debt as a wedding gift, and blows up when I refuse. Family drama ensues, wedding in danger, parents blame me. Should I just have kept my mouth shut and paid up? My wife and I have been asked by my in-laws to take over raising my wife's sister's 2 children under the age of 10. I already have 3 kids under the age of 10 and feel like I'll lose my mind if I have to take them, but crushed with guilt if I don't. I am desperate for ideas. I am in my mid-30s, and I have been married for over a decade to my wife who is also in her mid-30s. My wife has a younger sister who is an absolute train wreck and basket case. She is in her late 20s, and has already been married and divorced twice. She has borderline personality disorder and is an alcoholic. She has 2 daughters from 2 different marriages. Both of her husbands were abusive losers to her and my nieces. The first husband split as soon as she gave birth to niece number 1, and no one ever saw or heard from him again. The second husband is a drug addict who makes a hobby out of being unemployed so he doesn't have to pay child support. Because of my sister-in-law's wild and crazy mood swings, suicide attempts, and alcoholism, she lost custody of her daughters, and my wife's parents, who are in their 60s, have been taking care of and raising them for 3 years now. My wife and I visit her parents quite often, and we are very close with them. We also see my nieces, and they really are sweet girls, although they do act out sometimes, though who could blame them? Recently more family tragedy struck. My mother-in-law has just been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and will have to start radiation and chemotherapy immediately. My father-in-law has arthritis, and is starting to lose his hearing and sight. They recently approached us and asked if we would assume custody and raise my nieces, because they are just too old and sick to do it anymore. While my wife wanted to immediately say yes, I asked if we could please have time to talk it over and discuss it, to which they graciously replied for us to take our time. Now, while I genuinely love my nieces, and my heart breaks for their situation, I do not want to raise them. I'm breaking into a sweat and fighting off a panic attack just thinking about it. I have a full-time job and 3 young and very needy children. My wife, bless her, is a very good mother, has a part-time job to help supplement our income, and is a wonderful and supportive partner, but she is zero help around the house. She's terrible at keeping the house clean, and is an awful cook, so after I come home from work, I have to cook dinner and make sure the house is tidy. I have my kids help out with the chores, but of course they can only do so much. Then I have to spend time and play with my children, help with homework, etc. My wife helps them get ready for bed and reads to them while I do dishes. Then I have to make time for my wife. I am exhausted and overwhelmed. My weekends are spent cleaning inside and out and doing family activities. While my wife has promised to help with our nieces, realistically I know a majority of the responsibility will fall to me. I can't handle more stress. I can't handle the chaos of 2 more young children who demand attention and time. I'm already spread thin spending time one-on-one with each of my children. How can I possibly give it to 2 more? That's 2 more mouths to feed, 2 more children to clothe, shelter, and provide for, and educate, and we will be getting zero financial assistance from the deadbeat sister-in-law and her 2 ex-husbands. The thing is, my wife has no other siblings and I'm an only child. I don't think there is anyone else who can take these children. My in-laws can no longer raise them. We are all that is left. The only other option is foster care. I would feel awful putting my nieces in foster care, but I just don't think I can do it. I feel completely paralyzed. I've already had 2 breakdowns over this decision, out of sight from my wife and children. I'm depressed. I have no appetite. I feel like a failure as a man, as a father, and as a family member. I can't sacrifice my children's well-being for my nieces. I won't be able to be a good father or uncle to my nieces, and I know I'll just be going through the motions with my own children if I take on any more responsibility, but I don't know how I'll live with myself if I let my nieces go into the system. I feel borderline suicidal by this point, but I'm trying to keep it together for the sake of everyone. I don't know what to do or think. TLDR, my in-laws have been raising my 2 nieces because my sister-in-law and her 2 exes deserve the Worst Parents Ever award. My in-laws are too old and sick to take care of them anymore, and have asked my wife and I to take over. I already have 3 young children and a full-time career and I just can't handle anymore. But if I don't take them, they'll have to go into foster care. I'm starting to feel depressed and suicidal over this decision and I need help. Please provide your input and advice in the comments. Am I thinking about this the wrong way? If I am, don't hold back. I can't improve myself in this situation if no one says anything. Mother-in-law thinks I am gold digger. Many moons ago, I met what I thought would end up being my lifelong partner. We dated for a while before he popped the question, and even though it had only been 6 months, everything felt right, and I went ahead with accepting his proposal. Now, at this point, I'd never met his mother, and it was mainly due to distance. I met my then husband while we were both finishing college, some 7 hours from his hometown, so while we'd spoken briefly on the phone, I hadn't met his mom in person. She seemed nice enough though, always had good things to say, although years later looking back, I realized it was always generic, like you could almost read the same nice things she said on Hallmark greeting cards. She overall seemed happy that he was happy though, so I always ignored any weirdness while we were dating. After we graduated, we moved together to a large city about an hour from where his parents stayed. I started working immediately as a courier, which I enjoyed as I never wanted to be stuck in an office, and it let me get used to the city layout in the first weeks we lived there. I would be sent out to take documents between legal offices, medical offices, wherever it was necessary, and one day one of the deliveries took me into an upscale neighborhood to deliver a packet of paperwork to a lawyer. The delivery was uneventful, but leaving the neighborhood I seen a for sale sign, and I remember it all so clearly because that was the day I found my dream home. Something to know is that I was orphaned as an infant, and left with an extremely large inheritance. My parents, while only in their mid-20s when they had me, had the forethought to set things up in case anything happened to them, and they died when I was only a few years old. They'd inherited a lot of money when their parents died before I was born, and had an extremely successful business before a car crash took them both. To put it simply, I wouldn't have to work a day in my life if I didn't want to. My college was paid for, I had not a single dollar of debt, and enough to live on was given to me every month by an auto deposit. But at the time most of my funds were locked up in trusts until I turned 30, at which point I would receive everything. My at the time fiancé, while aware I had money from my deceased parents, had no idea the amount, and I had a long talk with him that same day as I sought to pull some of my trust early to buy the house. He was surprised, not upset, but not expecting it when I showed him the proof. It took a while to get the paperwork done, and everything sorted with the lawyer, but I secured the money from my trusts, and bought the house after 2 months of us living together. Then his mother declared that she wanted to visit. She hadn't seen her baby boy in almost a year, and she wanted to see what kind of life he was leading. We agreed to take care of driving and picking her up to go to dinner in our city. His mom, while pleasant and soft-spoken on the phone, turned out to be a chatterbox when we went to pick her up. She gushed over how pretty I was, that her son had finally found someone acceptable, and that she couldn't wait to see the cute little starter home we'd bought. It was a long ride as she went on and on about the things my fiancé had done growing up, the things she hoped he'd be able to accomplish, the dreams she knew he had. It was a little awkward. I barely got a word in edgewise, and my fiancé looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him up, but stayed silent as he drove us. Dinner was nice. She was quiet half the time as we were eating, and we made polite conversation as an upscale restaurant. I still remember the surprise on her face when I asked the waiter for the bill, and a comment about how it was great I was treating him to dinner for a change. I didn't say anything. My fiancé looked ashamed of her for a second, but we quickly moved on, and I didn't want to ruffle any feathers on the first night I'm meeting my fiancé's mother in person. It was during this night as well that I noticed something I would never forget about his mother, and that was that she didn't seem to realize I was the main handler of our finances. We left the restaurant, and the drive to our house was pleasant. We talked about the surrounding area, and she commented on the upscale neighborhoods we started driving through. I'll admit, I took a small amount of satisfaction when she got quiet as he slowed down and pulled up the driveway to her house. Once we got inside, and she realized the inside was as nice as the outside, she took a seat at the bar, and the conversation started up again. Not really though, since it was mostly her talking, and us nodding and listening as she droned on. She made comments about him buying the car, him paying for our vacations in the future, and she even insinuated that he financed our house. I let it slide. I was never one to flaunt my wealth, and she I think took that as a sign that she was right, but I didn't correct her. The night ended with her being slightly drunk, telling us stories of when fiancé was a baby, and eventually he coaxed her into the car to take her home. By the time he got back I was asleep, and while we didn't really talk much about the visit, he apologized for some of her comments, and we agreed it would never be a regular thing to have her over. The next few years of her in our lives revolved around, apart from her constant backhanded compliments, her second-guessing every single thing he paid for. Ever. He knew I was private about my finances. He never told her anything apart from that we were handling things as a couple, and I didn't really care if she wanted to delude herself, so we let it go. We were going to get married in the summer, 3 years after we got together, and it was only months before I was to marry that I found out I was infertile. 100% I would never have children, and actually had to have my ovaries removed due to them being deformed. He still wanted to be with me, despite also wanting children, so we stayed together. If you made it this far, congrats. Because you now get to the good part. I was making breakfast, it was a weekend, and he was in the backyard in the garden when his phone pinged a text. It was from his mom, and she was asking, "When are you getting the prenup?" I was shocked to say the least, and when I questioned him, he was also visibly surprised that she'd brought one up. We'd not discussed one. I had no intention of ever leaving him as long as he remained the man I fell in love with, and he had no money that he knew of that needed protected. He called her, didn't tell her I was in the room, and it was like she was an entirely different woman. He wasn't on speakerphone, but I could still hear her loudness as she proclaimed I was out for his money. He was barely able to speak as she ranted that he'd bought me a house, and cars, and given me tons of money to live on, and she demanded he protect the family money in case we got divorced. He eventually got her off the phone, shouting over her that our finances were none of his business, and he'd handle himself however he seen fit. It didn't stop though. Every day for the next week she hounded and harassed him about protecting his future in case I decided to take everything and leave him high and dry. It got even worse when his mother discovered I was barren. I don't even know how she found out, as myself and my husband were the only ones who knew, and he never told her. Just out of the blue, she started including in her vitriol rants that I was intentionally making myself infertile so I could keep all the money to myself, and not have to share with future children. It hurt, he could see it hurt, and I've never seen him so furious with someone. That particular phone call ended with him screaming that he never wanted to hear from her again, and her wailing that I was taking him, and everything else away from her. To put it mildly, I was done with her antics, and she was uninvited to the wedding. He explained it to the rest of his family, leaving out any mention of my wealth, and they all turned on her for the things she'd said. I'd met the rest of his family slowly over the years, and they'd all liked me, his mother seeming to be the only one with a problem. When we got married, it was a little over a month after we originally wanted, but we just told everyone we dragged our feet a little on the booking of the venue. His mother did not attend, but the rest of his family did, and were all happy for us. We spent a few happy years together, barely hearing from his mother. As we approached 30 though, I found myself more and more okay with not having children, whereas my husband wanted a couple. We got counseling, we talked endlessly, and after a heartbreaking few months of towing the line, we amicably decided to divorce. He wanted kids and I didn't. There just wasn't a way to compromise on that. We announced it to his family together. Many tears were shed by all, but it was overall probably one of the most peaceful divorces you could ever see. It only took 2 days for his mother to show up on my doorstep with the sheriff while hubby was at work. I was flabbergasted. When I opened the door, I was wide-eyed and had no idea what to do. But the sheriff stepped forward and handed me a piece of paper. I have to admit, when I read the bold print at the top while she smugly watched me, I ended up laughing out loud, like, almost doubled over, and laughing so loud the poor officer probably thought I was insane for a second. I looked at her, still laughing as she looked angry and confused, and addressed her directly for the first time in almost half a year. "Mother-in-law, are you seriously trying to evict me from my own home?" That's right. She had handed me an eviction notice. I handed it back to the sheriff, asked him to please stay where he is, and shut the door before she could respond. I don't know what she said, but her wailing could be heard loudly and clearly as I walked through the house to my office. When I went back out, I handed the sheriff the deed to my home, and he looked it over while she looked over his shoulder. The sheriff did not look amused as he glanced towards her multiple times. In my county, at the time, you had to have a law enforcement officer sign off that an eviction notice had been delivered in person before you could actually take a tenant to court to fully evict. So basically, whatever she thought she was doing, what she was actually doing was wasting this guy's time with whatever lies she told to get him here. He hands me back the deed, rips the eviction notice in half, and starts questioning why she thinks she can just evict the owner from their own home. "You need to get out. Get out of my son's house," she shouted that, and other incoherent things at me instead, and I rolled my eyes, almost amused still, and stepped inside while the sheriff started giving her a talking down. I left the door slightly open, but she didn't try to come in, nor did the sheriff, as I went ahead and texted my husband to let him know what has happening while going back to my office. When I emerged once more, the sheriff had a look on his face of someone who was absolutely done. But I was as well, and I'd already decided to burn this last bridge. See, the real reason our wedding was delayed was because we'd moved the date to see a lawyer. "I'm not leaving my house, but I will give you one thing that'll make you happy," I told her as I opened the door, and she looked uncertain, but didn't want to say too much with an officer of the law standing right next to us. "We got that prenup you wanted. Do you want to read it?" She practically tore the papers. She snatched them from my hands so fast, and she looked so pleased with herself up until it got to the point of splitting assets. To put it simply, everything attained while already married was split 50-50. Everything from before marriage was to be treated as though we were never married. "What the F game are you playing at?" she demanded. Clearly pissed, and I decided to hand her the single piece of paper in my other hand. She snatched it too, and as she pieced together in her mind what this all meant, she actually went pale. "You." She didn't finish the statement. She was shaking. She was speechless. I think she was furious. The sheriff was looking like he wanted to take a nap. I took my papers back, asked the sheriff to escort her off my property, and closed the front door. Apparently, it became the hottest family gossip because not long after texting my husband the cat is out of the bag, he started getting calls from his family while he was still at work, many begging him to reconsider leaving me, many telling him to do what he wants, and the majority condemning his mother after getting the full story. His family kept her at bay while we went through with divorce, as apparently she was beside herself, and believed she was the downfall of our marriage. One of his aunts remarked that she was distraught that she'd made her son give up a fortune. It didn't matter that my money was an inheritance, and untouchable to him even without the prenup. She was certain he could use it however he wished as long as we were married. I learned many years after we divorced, when his mother passed away, that she'd had mountains of debt. No one knows why she pushed so hard on that prenup. I stayed friends with my ex, and am with someone else for the past few years. We even go out occasionally with ex, his wife, and their kids. He's happy, I'm happy. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more stories delivered to you. Thanks for listening. See you later.